before our main speaker, we've got Jackie Hammond here from Mid-Devon Mobility, and she's going to talk just for a short while, about 10 minutes, on what Mid-Devon Mobility do and how they recruit their volunteers. So, Jackie, over to you.
Hello there, can you hear me with this? No. That's okay, they're bringing it up. There we go. Hello there, and happy birthday to u3a and to u3a nationally, and congratulations to each of the individuals in the room and not in the room that have been mentioned so far. It's such an amazing organisation. So, I'm Jackie, this is my colleague Rhiann, and I'm here just to tell you a little bit about Mid-Devon Mobility in case you haven't seen us or heard of us. So we're based in the Tiverton multi-storey car park, and some of you may know us because of hiring equipment from us. We used to be the old Motability place, and you could hire motorised wheelchairs from us. We've now evolved into something so much bigger than that. So we have the minibuses that drive around and do the pickups of children from schools, and also providing transport in the communities. So a lot of you will still be driving, a lot of you may have never been drivers, and some of you may have chosen not to drive anymore. And if you're out and about in the villages, you may find that when you phone for a taxi, the taxi is going to pay or charge you from where you are starting, but also from where they are starting, because they have to make it worth their while. So an example that we had was a lady from Bampton. She wanted to go half a mile up the road to go and see a friend and play a game of cards. She then wanted to be picked up a few hours later and go back home the half mile. The quote from a taxi was £40, because the taxi driver, in fairness, with the fuel and with the time that he wasn't going to be paid for doing other journeys, was having to come from Tiverton to her, do her little half-mile journey, then come back to Tiverton, and then do the whole lot in reverse. So we provide community transport, and we do it through Ring and Ride, which is our minibuses that go around, and they pick people up from their doors. You don't have to get to a bus stop, so if it's poor weather, cold weather, blazing hot weather, it's English. They will pick you up from your door, and they will give a helping hand, which is a steadying arm. They will lift your, if you have a walker or if you just need support in slippery weather, they will make sure that you're safe, and they'll drop you back to the door. And these are run also in community cars. So we have people that kindly volunteer their own time, but we pay 45p a mile, which is the maximum that the government lets us pay. It's not declarable, it's not taxable, because it's covering expenses. And it's these people that provide transport for that lady in Bampton. They only then have to charge the lady for the little journey that she does. So 45p a mile, she's not going to be paid much at all. There's a admin fee, but it's a lot cheaper than the taxis. And we cover what we refer to as the dead mileage. So from the driver's front door to the client that they're picking up, and when they drop them off, back to their front door. So all their mileage is paid. And we're not in competition with the taxi drivers or the other support mechanisms that are around. We're trying to support them. We have money from the government and kindly from the council and the lottery fund to help us provide this service. And that's why we pay the maximum. My daughter helps out for Somerset, she only gets 30p a mile, so we give as much as we can do. But it's a service that you may find you're able to help with as well If you're regularly doing a little journey and you've got an empty car coming back because you drop a friend somewhere regularly, but you could actually take somebody from where you're dropping your friend back to your village or somewhere else, then we can help with that, because we would be covering your fuel costs. So if you're struggling financially, then it's a way of having your fuel covered legally and legitimately. You're not ripping anybody off. It's just a helping hand for that as well. So similarly, I talk at food banks, because there are people that are using food banks that have a car sitting on their drive, and we can help them out. If they're coming into Tiverton for their own appointments or to do their own shopping or whatever it is, then we can cover their costs if they're kindly taking somebody from their community with them. So it helps them as well. We know it doesn't pay a wage, but it does help communities. Similarly, it might be that you become a service user yourselves, because as you stop driving, you may find that you're too far or it's too dangerous a walk to get to the local bus stop. Or it might be a hill that you can get down and not get up again. Or if you have hip problems, it might be that it's a lot easier to get up the hill than it is to get down the hill. So don't forget that we're here to help you all. We also do what you may have known as the food delivery services that you used to get years ago. Meals on Wheels might be familiar to some of you because of your own parents or grandparents. We do a home delivery service where we provide hot food that's cooked in a professional kitchen. It's around pub prices, and you can have a 2-course meal delivered to your home that's being made in a professional kitchen at our premises. Again, we use community drivers that are willing to deliver those for us. So we're going to be starting a service out of Bampton, and it may be that you know of people that never have a hot meal because of their own circumstances that would benefit from that. We also have a community room. You're obviously a community in your own right, but maybe if you're carers and there's somebody that you regularly look after while you're out doing your u3a things, they might want to be doing something as well. And we have activities, we have knit and natter groups, we've got a magician coming in to do things. So it might be people that you normally look after that you want to book into one of our groups. So again, we have things going on that might be of use to people in your community or people in your families or your friendship circles. We're never looking at taking people away from other volunteering. And similarly, if people find that they're volunteering for us and then it's not working for them, but they want to do other volunteering, there's never a bridge burned. We never have bad words or bad feelings about people that leave us. Some people dabble with charity shop work and other volunteering in Cold Harbour Mill or in the National Trust properties. Some things shut down or they have quieter periods. And so they come and do a bit with us, and then when they're needed again for what is their main volunteering role, they disappear back to that and might join us again in 6 months, 8 months' time. So there's no long-term commitment if you don't want it to be. And we work with whatever you can do, so we don't put people on a shift as a volunteer. If they can come in, that's great. If they can't, that's fine, and they can let us know when they are available. So it might be that you say, I can come and help make coffees for the Knit and Natter group, but I can only do it once a month. That's great. If you say, I don't actually know which day that month of the month I can be helpful, that's fine as well. So I will be out in your foyer in a little while after you've done your eating and drinking and celebrating and listening to your other guest speaker. And I have a collection of brochures and leaflets that you're very welcome to take. So we have the one about the services that we provide. A few of what I've mentioned are in there, but because we're grant aided, some of them are short terms, they conclude, but then they come back again when we get the next grant. And some of them are new ones that aren't in the publications currently. There's also another brochure about our newsletter. We do a monthly newsletter. You can pick it up and see what's going on. Something might interest you, other things won't. Our food delivery service, again, all these will be out there, and it's just a leaflet you can pick up that if you think somebody would benefit from it, by all means pass it on. We have a volunteering little brochure that explains in more detail a few of the things that I've mentioned, but my role is to recruit people as volunteers. But I 100% believe in the charity and what it does, which is why I also tell what services we do and how we benefit the communities. So although my role is predominantly recruiting volunteers, I think it would be very mean of me to just stand and recruit volunteers and not quite as interesting. If somebody is interested in joining up as a volunteer, there's a little postcard that you can drop through to us just with something on saying please contact me, and we do have a letterbox on the wall just outside our office in the multi-storey car park. This one is a specific one about volunteers that will go and visit people in their own homes. So some people that you look after or that you visit might not be able to leave their homes to come to the community hub. So we send volunteers to them that will just sit. They don't do medical care or personal hygiene care, but they will make a cup of tea and have a chat with them while you go and get your hair done or go to something else, just so that somebody's touched base with them. So it might be something you're willing to do. It might be something you know somebody would benefit from. If you want me to contact you, and that doesn't commit you to anything, there'll be these little forms, and you can just drop me your name and either an email or a phone number. It doesn't go any further. We don't sell our database or do anything horrible like that. And it will be me that contacts you, so at least you've met me in this informal way. But I'll then have a chat with you. We can meet up. We can meet up at any time. I work evenings, I work weekends, I fit around with whatever people want. And finally, we have an event happening on Saturday, the 8th of October. It's a celebration of what we do and of what we've done. And everybody in the community is welcome to come and join us at that. We have currently got catering for 200 people. We're not at that level yet, and it's a free event, but for fire regulations, similar to what you've had here, we just ask for your name and the name of anybody else that you're bringing, so that the rugby club has a door list. We don't want 3,000 people turning up because Facebook suddenly announced a hog roast and salad. So if you're interested in that, there'll be these cards around as well. They're not invitations, they're just information cards. Just give my colleague Hayley a call or an email and say that you and however many named people would like the names on the door. We will have a board up saying what we've done, but it's a community event. We're not going to do hard sell on you. It's music, hog roast, and desserts made by our chef. So please feel welcome to contact us and put your names on the list and come along 7 p.m. until late. So we'll see how long we can keep the band for. But thank you very much for your time, and it's great to see real people at a real event again, isn't it? So that's me.
Thank you, Jackie. So now we'll move on to our principal speaker, excuse me, for the day, who is Jeremy Salter from the Tiverton Civic Society. He will talk about Tiverton and the role of the Civic Society in the town. Jeremy.
I don't know if you can hear me, or should I use that? speak at them.
Need the microphone.
You need the microphone. Okay, right. Well, again, congratulations on your 30th anniversary. Can you hear me now?
No.
Okay, fine. Tiverton Civic Society has actually been going for 54 years. So I hope you'll get there. Okay. We have a far smaller membership than you do. It's around about 100. And that is not very good. Our logo, which the late Roy Webber designed for us a few years ago. So, first of all, I thought, where do we go next? How do we press it? Next one. Up or down, is it?
That's left to right.
Oh. Yeah. Now, you might think, why am I showing you a picture of Sidmouth when this is all about Tiverton and the background of civic societies? Well, Sidmouth is thought to have been the first ever civic society. It was called the Sidmouth Improvement Association, and it was founded in 1846. So, and it was the first of many, and they said when they set it up, it was for the comfort and accommodation of visitors and for improvement generally. It was a significant date. In 1846 also, the railway got as far as Dawlish and Teignmouth, and all the South Coast resorts were vying to get their share of the booming, or shortly to boom, mass holiday traffic. So each place wanted to be as attractive as possible for visitors. And Sidmouth, rather a genteel resort, was wanting to get its share of that particular trade. And so the present Civic Society is called the Sid Vale Association. And strangely enough, it's also probably the wealthiest civic society in the country. A Canadian merchant banker came to the town in 2007. He was a Devonian by birth. He found out he had a terminal illness, only had a few months to live, and he contacted the Civic Society, or the Sid Vale Association. He wasn't even a member, and said, I want to leave all my life savings to you. And so this man, Keith Owen, left them £2.5 million, which they've put to good use ever since. They spent well invested. They spent 90,000 of it so far. They've taken on the management of all the footpaths, 60 kilometres of footpaths in Sidmouth and the area around it. They've taken over the museum. They've also acquired, without enough resources, 50 acres of land in the middle of Sidmouth. So the early civic societies were, in fact, like that. They wanted to improve their towns, to make people proud of their towns, to attract people to visit them. And so the sort of things that the early civic societies wanted to do was to provide parks, to provide public gardens, to provide open spaces, recreational facilities, better housing for the poor, and preservation of historic buildings. So, in fact, the aims of civic societies are still much the same, including our own. It's strange that there was no planning system, national planning system, in the 19th century or the 18th century when many other fine towns were produced, yet many fine towns were produced. There were no planners being trained. But so up to local individuals, landowners, and people, committees wanting to do the best they could for themselves, and also early industrialists they want to provide really good housing for their workers. And in fact, model towns, model villages, with all the facilities their workers would need. Schools, churches, hospitals even, and recreational facilities. And you may know some of them. Saltaire, near Bradford, Titus Salt in 1851, established perhaps the best known one, which is now a World Heritage Site. But of course, John Heathcote provided his model town in West Ex, not far from here, well known nationally. So he provided all these sort of things for his workers, and his family, like him, philanthropists, have gone on providing housing. So the last lot of Heathcote housing was built in the 50s and 60s, and many of their workers can still take advantage of it. So it is well known nationally. And there are other ones. Swindon Railway Village is very well known. It was saved by John Betjeman in particular, actually. It is now, again, a nationally known site. We've got Bourneville, came a bit later, in 1900, George Cadbury. And we got Port Sunlight, again, very well known. And places like Bedford Park in London, the Queen Anne movement, which is fine middle-class housing. And then eventually the Garden City movement, following the ideas of one Ebenezer Howard. Places like Welwyn Garden City and Letchworth were established just after the turn of the century. And eventually there was a Town and Country Planning Act. The government stepped in to establish planning, and that's development from there. So that is the background of it. So that a major civic society like Birmingham and the London Society had quite a lot to do with planning from that one. But let's go to the next picture. So I'm getting used to this thing gradually. There were lots of problems that weren't solved, of course. It's the industrial cities in particular had vast areas of slums, very back-to-back terrace housing, which were built without a thought of providing open space or facilities for people. And these have really got past their lifespan in a way by the 1930s. So what had dominated since the 1930s have been slum clearance and the provision of housing for the poorer members of the community. That is actually in Liverpool, and the next one was actually in Newcastle on time. And so a whole lot of solutions have been put in to try and solve these problems, and none of them entirely satisfactory. Civic societies have had quite a lot to do with this, and talking to local authorities and so on. I just jump right on to the 1960s now, because this is when Tiverton Civic Society and many others were established. What was different about the 1960s? The age of modernism. Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister, you've never had it so good. Harold Wilson, who took over after him, brave new Britain, everything should be pulled down and rebuilt. And so what we had, suddenly, was a lot of money around and a mass move towards redevelopment, not only of cities, but of towns like Tiverton and smaller places as well. So this is a title of a recent book. So what we had suddenly coming in with development on a massive scale. Town centres in particular were pulled down, and in their place you had urban motorways, you had shopping malls, you had high-rise blocks, you had concrete and glass everywhere, and so many historic buildings were lost forever. Obviously things had to move on, but this was a massive change. And in 1957, when the Civic Trust, a sort of overall umbrella body for civic societies, was started, there were 200 civic societies in Britain. In 1967, there were 650. In 1978, there were 1,300. And that's the change. And that includes us, lots of other ones. By 1965, just about every town in the country, including Tiverton, in fact there were 500 of them, had set up their own urban redevelopment schemes. They wanted change. They wanted different types of town centres. So let's go on to the next one. So that's what you have, that sort of thing. Birmingham was one of the worst examples of this. The Bull Ring Centre was set up in 1964. A vast shopping mall. Urban motorways were built right through the city. Vast numbers of older housing was pulled down to make this sort of thing. And Birmingham was perhaps one of the worst examples, but there were others. Bath, the historic city, 1,000 housing were pulled down, including 300 Georgian listed buildings to make way for urban roads and a new shopping centre, and so on. In fact, the planners, they said, did far more damage to Bath, to Plymouth, to Exeter than all Hitler's bombs did put together. So the age had gone mad. So that is why civic societies were set up, to protect what was left, to protect the future of towns and cities. In fact, I'll just give a quote here, I can't find it here, but we'll come to it in a moment. John Betjeman was actually a poet we all knew, but he was one of the great leaders of the fight back. And he had quite a lot of poems you might well know. Actually, a 1937 poem, "Come friendly bombs and fall on Slough, it isn't fit for humans now. Britain grass to graze a cow, swarm over death," was well known. Another one written right in the middle of the 60s was called "Inexpensive Progress." First few lines: "Let no provincial high street, which might be your or my street, look as it used to do, but let the chain stores placed here, their miles of black glass fascia, and traffic thunder through. And if there is some scenery, some unpretentious greenery surviving anywhere, it does not need protecting, for soon we'll be erecting a power station there." And so on. So, get on next. Some of the buildings that were pulled down, and this caused an enormous fuss. John Betjeman had founded the Victorian Society a few years before, which was fighting against the destruction of Victorian buildings everywhere. Civic societies like the London Society, many other societies like, well, say Britain's Heritage, for instance, and going back to the Georgian Society and so on, were all combining together to try and fight this relentless pace of redevelopment. The Euston Arch was a particular one, was an enormous fight to save it. And it failed, actually. The Euston Arch eventually had to be taken down. And actually also the Euston Station, the great hall in the Euston Station was taken down. It still exists. It is buried somewhere, and people are still talking about putting it back. Yeah, and all the blocks were labelled and buried somewhere in Hertfordshire. The Coal Exchange, 1829, there was a great battle to save that in London. Again, it failed. But things were beginning to change. And again, led by John Betjeman in particular, St Pancras Station was a great plan to pull that down. But it was saved. It was taken over Grand Hotel by the Marriott Hotels Group and used for other purposes as well. And again, the Foreign Office was planned for being removed, and that was saved. So gradually people were fighting back to save their heritage, or try to save their heritage. And one of the villains of the piece, Le Corbusier, well known as an architect of fine houses, but his ideas had a devastating effect. All the planning schools in Britain taught his ideas on urban renewal as if he was some sort of saint. But in fact, what he was saying, that there was no future for town centres, what should be instead was this sort of thing. This is the well-known plan, the plan u3a for part of the right bank in Paris. It was never actually fulfilled. As you can see, everyone was living high-rise blocks. Much of the remainder of the city was pulled down, including most of the historic buildings. He said that there was, to save itself, every great city must completely rebuild its centre. His ideas were actually followed in Marseille to some extent, and almost completely in Chandigarh in India. But most people thought this was all right for perhaps the Soviet Union, building these great block cities with no opposition, but certainly not for Britain. So he is really, his ideas were sort of great at the time, but obviously turned out completely wrong. So tower blocks were built everywhere, all over Britain. Hundreds of them. 440,000 high-rise flats have been built by 1970, for instance. Both in towns and cities across the land, but thankfully not in Tiverton, as it happens. We haven't got anything more than about 10 stories, I don't think, in Tiverton. And it's at its worst, actually, in Scotland, where Glasgow is full of them. A lot of those were unfit for use within a few years, had to be pulled down. Damp, bad building materials, and so on. A lot of people made money out of it, but it went bad. And one of the great turning points was Ronan Point, which you may remember, 1968. It had been built by Taylor Woodrow only 2 months previous to this, and one corner of it collapsed. There was a bit of a fire in a gas stove, and it progressively fell down like a house of cards. This was in London, in Hewham, and it killed 4 people, injured 17 others, but it caused a great shock. And it was said that no more high-rise blocks should be built after 1970, 71, but they did go on getting built, and we saw the great disaster of the Grenfell Tower, which was only started in 1975, and other great problems which still exist. So, also, in fact, there was a lot of corruption. People were making vast amounts of money out of this. You may remember Newcastle, T. Dan Smith, John Poulsen, and the Conservative Minister Reginald Maudlin were jailed or had to resign because of corruption in award of building contracts. And so there was corruption throughout the land. And so the things were changing by the early 70s in some places, not everywhere, but that's what's going on. One problem is that historic buildings were being listed by then, they were appreciated in communities, but the fines for pulling them down were derisory. The maximum, for the very worst examples, was 2 years imprisonment, but usually the maximum was 3,000 years, £3,000. Not 3,000 years. Dan Cruikshank, who you know is still on television sometimes, Colin Amery, wrote a book, The Rape of Britain, in 1975. They said, the damage has been colossal. It's been carried out knowingly and effectively, almost as if there was an officially sponsored competition to see how much of Britain's architectural heritage could be destroyed. Right, that's a good background to the... So I said the tide was turning. And other things like conservation areas were established, conservation officers were being employed by local authorities, many more buildings were being listed, and other heritage assets as well. So near here Exeter suffered enormous damage in the Second World War from bombing. This is actually Bedford Circus, going back to about 1770. It was bombed in the Second World War, and many people think it wasn't that badly damaged, it should have been rebuilt. There was a tendency to pull down everything and build new, and as you know, in Exeter, much was built very badly. And the shopping centres built since that time have had to be just taken down, replaced by other ones. So Exeter Civic Society was formed in 1961 to fight the planners again, the future development. This is North Street. A lot of fine medieval buildings on one side of North Street were pulled down despite great process to build the Guildhall shopping centre. So where Woolworths and Sainsbury's and places were, all this went. It was a very badly designed centre. As you know, the other side of the road, where the car park, the small car park is, was never viable because it had no footfall, and a lot of it's empty. There was some success. You may remember the house that moved to make way for the inner urban road. That old Tudor house was actually moved on wheels by brute manpower and placed where it is now. So that is the sort of thing that could be done. Now coming back to Tiverton now, it's got a long time. Tiverton, as you see from this view from the church tower, St Peter's, has an outstanding conservation area and centre with a great contrast between Hescott's model town on the right and the old woolen town, historic town on the left. So it's nationally well known for many of its fine buildings to do with the woolen industry as well as the Hescott Centre. The 4th Street in 1845, looking from where the corner is down towards the town hall, in fact. Here, a fine town.
Sorry, can you speak into the microphone?
Sorry, I'm again. Yeah, sorry, I put it down. Yeah, that view is showing fine lines of Georgian houses. On the left there, that tall building was built in 1730, and it was actually owned by Sir John Dunce. Had quite a lot to do with running the town and the woolen industry. On the right, just on the right-hand side, was what was the 3-ton became the Palmerston Hotel. Both were destroyed, as well as many other buildings in the early 60s. The building on the left, what had become the headquarters offices of Starkey Knight and Ford, the brewery, and the Palmerston Hotel was empty and had been taken over by a builder, local builder. It wasn't in a great condition. One night in 1961, part of the frontage of the Palmerston mysteriously fell down, and immediately the builder was given permission to pull the whole thing down, although it was a listed building. It was a Georgian building. And the one on the left, Tesco's, Starkey Knight and Ford had then closed. Tesco's would give him permission to open a supermarket behind it, and they would have to give him permission to retain the frontage of the building. So the entrance to Tesco's was not particularly imposing, and one night, mysteriously in 1964, they had all the scaffolding up, cracks appeared in the frontage, and again, immediately, without much ado, given permission to pull the whole building down, the whole frontage. And lots of other buildings have went in that way. In fact, there's another view of an early view of 1890 of the Palmerston Hotel. An old coaching inn. What's in its place? In Charles Newton's book of Tiverton, in fact, said that's one of the two worst buildings in Tiverton. It's replacing the Palmerston Hotel, the Gate of India. The second one he put down in his book was the Half Moon Inn in the marketplace. I remember when I moved to Tiverton in 1962, I used to go and sit in the old Half Moon pub, which was just next to it, in a line of quite attractive terrace, Victorian terrace. That was pulled down, the whole line, and this was put up in its stead. Actually, to be fair, I think it's been made to look rather better than it was originally by the present owners. But there's lots of competition for the worst building in Tiverton. Lots of competitions. In fact, I think Tiverton is a wreck, really. It has been neglected. And as a result, it has actually been called by English Heritage and Historic England heritage at risk, very bad and deteriorating. That's the whole of the Central Conservation Area and West Ex. It's been neglected. You just need to look very carefully at the town to see what a potentially brilliant town we have, but how bad it really is. And so that's the sort of thing Civic Society has tried to fight against in many ways. Another thing, the Tiverton Canal, the Grand Western Canal, was really a muddy ditch in the 60s. But a plan was put forward by developers to fill it in completely and build housing over it. And again, there was a great protest. That was actually in 1969, one of the walks of protest about this. And I actually went on one of those walks. I'm not sure if it's that particular one. And I do remember when I was teaching at Blundell's to taking parties up to help dredge it out or to make it improve. Eventually, the control of the canal was wrested from the existing Waterways Authority and passed on to Devon County Council and Mid-Devon District Council, converted into a country park and conservation area, so it was saved. So, Tiverton Civic Society, as I said, was founded in 1968. Some of the leading lights of this were, just to name a few, the bill authors, Council bill authors, Mayor of Tiverton, Alderman, had an enormous amount to do with saving the heritage of Tiverton. He was a member of the committee of the Civic Society. He led the fight to rescue the canal. He got the Tiverton Museum moved from 2 pokey rooms in 4th Street to the present premises, and so on. So he was a very important figure. The first Civic Society, our first president was a member of the Heathcote Amery family, Colonel William, later Sir William Amery. Sir John Amery was very interested, and so Sir John Amery was very interested. He wanted that lamppost saved, which you may not often notice on the 4th Street Hill. Here is it was 3 lampposts originally, a Victorian lamppost. It isn't actually even complete, but it became a Grade 2 listed building or structure, and that was saved. And so the Society took on the motto, watch and ward. Look at what developments are taking place and remain alert to any significant changes affecting the local environment. The secretary, Peggy Allen, was also a leading member of the Society. That was one house that was saved at the top of the hill, Phoenix Lane, by not just this Civic Society, but many other groups together. Raymond Penny House, and the council then wanted to pull it down. It was an 18th century house, not particularly distinguished, part of Tiverton's heritage. The Civic Society had a great success in getting this building in St Andrew Street restored. The old jail and police station, the jail on the left the police station on the right. The jail was actually pulled down, but the police station went on being the police station until 1956. We managed to get that saved, so that was a great success. We then started putting up blue plaques all around Tiverton, and still do so when we think of people we need to commemorate and places we need to commemorate. That is just one example. There's further along you've got one Sir John Heathcote. This is in St Peter Street, and also there's the Great House has one on, and so on. And there's sort of information about the place. We then set up the Merchants Trail, and so in 2006, shortly afterwards the West Ex Trail in 2008, to highlight the fine buildings left by the merchants and many other buildings as well as John Heathcote and other buildings in West Ex, producing pamphlets and information panels all around the place, and other signage, and so leaflets, as I said, and many local historians came together. The money was raised from a number of sources, but the biggest source of money was the European Regional Development Fund. I don't want to make a political point of it, but leaving the European Union has meant, of course, that we don't get that sort of money anymore. The Merchants Trail, we revised everything in 2018 and issued new leaflets for everyone. I also have actually been developing with a firm called Trailtail, developed an app, mobile phone app, which people can wander around the Merchants Trail and see all the pictures and things for it as well. So also in the pavements you'll see medallions. These medallions designed actually by children in primary schools in Tiverton. We always value that sort of link. Mostly designed by children from Two Moors School actually, and the figures in the middle were largely the wool marks, the leaden wool marks which were attached to the cloth which was sent there. These lead wool marks, many of them have been discovered by metal detectors in the Netherlands where they've been discarded, one or two in shipwrecks. There's quite a lot in Tiverton Museum now, and recently Jane Evans, who you may remember, has written a section in Peter Maunder's book, The Tiverton Cloth, outlining all the 129 wool marks that have been discovered. And so, and guided walks. Anne Davis, who many of you may know, led guided walks for years, or still does occasionally, around these two trails in particular. So groups from other towns and villages, and u3a groups and so on. u3a group from South Norton's coming very soon, would be taken around a lot of these buildings. And of course, the many fine buildings. This is perhaps they say one of the finest examples of church carving, if not the finest in the whole of England. The Greenway Chapel and porch. Obviously, because of weathering, they had to replace and recarve many of the outside ones, but inside the porch and inside the chapel, all the original ones. And of course, the Grade 1 listed St George's Church, again, one of Tiverton's finest built. It built in a really over a stage of periods from about 1710 to 1730 odd. They call it the Dissenters' Church. One of the problems was, of course, I said Tiverton in decline. Many of other historic buildings are a concern. St George's Church is hardly used these days. Most of the services and everything take place in St Paul's Church. Gotham House has recently become empty. Although they are in private ownership, the Chilcot Chapel, the great house, are not used much these days, and so on. So it's a great concern about the future of these buildings. They have to be kept because they're Grade 1 and Grade 2 star, but who's to pay for all the repairs and things like that? Old Blundell's, again, cloth merchant, built in 1604, Peter Blundell, who wanted it built, died in 1601, but it's his plans and his money from his will had left that church. Imported many of these buildings, expensive limestones from far away, from Hamstone in Somerset or down on the south coast of Devon. And they have obviously the Westex Trail would include the Heathcote factory and the history of John Heathcote. This is actually an old print from about 1855. It looks much the same now. The school on the right is a fine building. They were built in 1841. It's no longer a school. The building at the back was burnt down in 1936 and replaced by something fairly similar in appearance, but it's not nearly so fine. But it's been the two lodges are actually listed buildings from the regional factory.
Sorry, can you use the microphone?
No, sorry, I'm again failing, sorry. And as I said, I mentioned the housing in Westex. This is slightly later. The original housing is along Leeds Street, as you can see. And so that is part of the Heathcote model village, if you can call it. And there are one or two older buildings in Westex, like the Waldron's Chapel, of course, and the Waldron's Arms Houses of 1579. And we actually entered the conservation area by invitation in a competition run by Historic England in 2017-18, and they selected it as one of the 6 finest in the country, as you can see. 6 what they call amazing conservation areas. I'm not saying it has all the finest buildings, but its history is so unique and comprehensive. We also entered Tiverton Conservation Area for a competition run by Civic Voice, our present parent organisation, and 149 entries were made, and Tiverton came 8th. So it shows how important it is nationally. So I myself have worked through Civic Voice. I went on a training course, the scheme run by the War Memorials Commission to record all the war memorials, not only in Tiverton but in the immediate surrounding villages. There are extraordinary mixture of war memorials, bus shelters, playing fields, even a lectern in the all described. Of course, there's the crosses and the commemorative places in churches. This actually is from Halverson Parish Church. They hadn't been recorded before, so we also did a condition survey, so I would grade them according to in what state they are. So that's all recorded now. It was set up in 2018 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. And 2 of our members, Jane Evans and the late Barbara Keane, recorded all the gravestones and all memorials in St. Peter's Churchyard, in St. Peter's Church, in St. George's Church and St. George's Graveyard and so on. So they've set up a comprehensive database. This actually is the Dunsford Memorial, which includes many names. Now these are very useful for genealogists, of course. So in fact, I'm always getting people asking about their Tiverton genealogy and try to answer the questions. If not, I've got lots of people I can pass the inquiries on to, like Peter Maunder, like Mike Sampson, and like the Tiverton Museum, who usually come up with the answer. So genealogy is a great, well, it's had a great boom recently, and so people are very interested in their Tiverton roots. The Tiverton Civic Society also have outings in the summer to different historic properties near and far. This was actually a trip to Hillingdon House on the way to Cullompton. Not a particularly ancient building, a very interesting one, built in 1845 in refined grounds. So that, and we link up with, well, this is Jo Mortimer, you may know. She's actually very interested in the preservation of the ancient buildings in Tiverton, and she did let us use a whole lot of her pictures, but she's also done quite a number for us when buildings are a threat, without charge, in fact. Including one of this building recently, the old police station in the Avenue was, I showed you a police station already, from 1956 to 2012, this was the police station, a fine building built in 1888, I think, and it left in an awful state. It got vandalised. The present owners, who I know quite well, wanted to put it down and put some housing there instead. It was turned down by the local planning committee. It was then went to appeal. They turned it down, so it was of historical significance. So what do? They can't afford to repair it. Do they just leave it to rot, or what? It's a great problem with many old buildings. And of course, there's one Exley House within Heathcote's factory grounds, built in 1820 by John Heathcote for his daughter Caroline Bruin and her husband Ambrose. It was a fine building. It's where I had my first job interview. So before I went to Blundell, I worked for Heathcote's for 5 years, and it was up till 2000, 2005, it was being used still. This has been allowed to deteriorate. We made quite a fuss about it. I think the local conservation officer did too. It has been sort of repaired now. They've made it sort of airtight, watertight now. It's now the sort of building, you don't know what the future will be. Alexandra Lodge, it's now concluded an enormous blanket. It was one of the fine old buildings of Tiverton. The large estate used to be called Zephyr Lodge, but what is the future of that? It was left at Tiverton, or bequeathed to Tiverton Almshouse Trust by one of the Amory families, and they don't know what to do with it really. And so they have to protect it because it is a listed building, but it costs enormous amounts to restore it. So the other cause is, of course, the Tiverton Leet.
Microphone.
Can you use the microphone, please?
Sorry, yes, I know. Yeah, the Tiverton Leet was obviously, it might cost 100,000 to restore a full flow to it. So that is an ongoing issue. So what, as a civic society, do is look at all the planning applications that come in. If we find things wrong with them, we object. We write in objections. We go to planning committee meetings and so on. This was a planning consultation, as you say, in 2020, and even take part in protests against some planning applications. This was the Tidcombe Hall one. I was asked to join the committee, and as well as other members of our civic society, and we did so because we thought it was all wrong. And take part in public inquiries about major new developments, like that proposed development, which is always in the news, but nothing ever happens, at Junction 27. So a lot of our time is doing that. So our aims are to protect the town, to make people proud of what it is, to make sure that new developments are well designed. And so this is one in the news recently, as you can see. You only got to the end, right? This was the town hall development, an awkward site. The designer of it is nationally one of the best known planning consultants in the country, Michael Riches. And he and his office won the Royal Institute of Buildings Sterling Prize for Goldsmith Street in social housing scheme in Norwich. But it doesn't look terribly good at the moment. Some people call it the Colditz Wall. So this is part of the conservation area. Should it have been built? It's an ongoing debate. And this one, as you can see, the Premier Inn, it's not the view I wanted to show, but looking down Phoenix Lane, there's a fine view into the countryside beyond and the Iron Age Hill fort at the top. It was completely ruined by this building. And it's in the conservation area. It's too big, it's too ugly. And so I am working with two professors from Reading University who are writing a book about planning decisions that should never have been made. And this is, they think, is an ideal example. They've been to Tiverton recently and visited me, and we looked at this. Was it necessary? Is it in the right place? More like it. So that sort of thing. Our society has many links to other groups. I am a member of Sustainable Tiverton. So civic societies generally are concerned about climatic change, about how we can locally kind of put in schemes to ameliorate this and to become more resilient. And so Sustainable Tiverton are an organisation who are doing quite a lot towards it. This wall was painted recently. It hasn't actually been opened officially, not until October the 1st. So I helped to design it, and I helped to prepare it with a number of other groups in Tiverton. That sort of link is important. I am actually one of the Tiverton Neighbourhood Plan. I am a member of the steering committee, as is one of our other members. We've put this together. It is a way of local people putting forward their own ideas about how Tiverton should look. And it will carry equal weight with the Tiverton District Council's local plan. So it's a very important document. Shortly, you will be given a chance to vote about it on a referendum. Do look at it. That is all I actually have got on this thing. So we are, as I said, concerned about the future. Things are beginning to turn a little bit. The government is wanting local people and local organisations to have much more say in developments. And so both the Neighbourhood Plan and Tiverton Civic Society, I think, should benefit from this. And so that is the future. I have been chairman for 15 years. I hope someone will be able to take over soon who will be able to push forward our agenda. And yeah, that is just our general statement about ourselves. That is all I have to say. Thank you.